Hi there, kids. Last story we talked and heard about spinners and weavers. Remember, spinners made thread out of cotton, flax, or wool, and weavers took this thread of yarn and wove cloth out of it. There was still an important step left to make specific pieces of clothing, shirts, such as dresses or shirts. This last step involved cutting out pieces of cloth and then sewing them together. Today you will learn about tradespeople who sewed clothes out of cloth. Today's stores have a lot of clothes in a variety of sizes and styles ready to buy when customers come to the store. Most stores have clothes for boys and girls, in addition to shoes, hats, and any other garments you may need. Customers in a clothing store can choose what they want. If they prefer, they can go into a fitting room and try it on before they pay for it so they can decide if they like it. How do you get your clothes? Do you go to a store and try it on, or does someone shop for your clothes for you? Most of today's clothes are made in factories where people use machines to make many items very quickly. But long ago, making even just one dress or shirt took a lot of time and effort, even for an expert tradesperson. Tradespeople didn't have the time or money to make a lot of clothes in advance and hang them up in their shops, hoping customers would come in and buy them. Instead, they had to make sure that they had a customer first, and then they would make what the customer wanted. This is called made to order or a custom order because it is made a specific way for a specific customer. It usually took many days, even weeks between the time the customer first came into the shop and ordered a garment and when he or she actually took home the completed piece of clothing. In the old days, people had to trust the tradesperson who was sewing the garment because they couldn't just try it on or bring it back to the store if they didn't like it. Most children's clothes were made at home, and making a pair of pants was very difficult and different from making a dress or shoes or hats, so you had to go to a specific tradesperson who was a specialist in the type of clothing you needed. Let's go over a vocabulary word first. The word today is measure. Measure means to figure out the size of something by comparing it to another object or by using a special tool. For example, I used a ruler to measure the length of my pencils. Let's listen carefully to today's story to find out about 4 different tradespeople during colonial times who made different types of clothing. Let's begin. In colonial America, most people made their own clothing. This was especially true for farmers who had everything they needed to make clothes on their farms. Because making clothes was hard work, most people had only 2 outfits, one set of work clothes and one set of fancier clothes to wear on Sunday. That was it. People did not get new clothes until their old clothes were worn out. Some farmers and their families had the money to buy clothing instead of making it themselves, so they would take a trip to town when they needed new clothing. There, they would find several different people who specialized in making different things: the dressmaker, the tailor, the hatter, and the cobbler. Think how much time farmers' wives could save if they bought dresses instead of making them. In the old days, there were no racks full of dresses for a woman to try on. It took a lot of time for a dressmaker to make a dress, so she wanted to make sure someone would buy every dress made. And it cost a lot of money to buy a dress, so a farmer's wife wanted to choose the exact color and style she wanted. The dressmaker might display 1 or 2 dresses in the shop window, but most dresses had to be made to order. What does made to order mean? That's right, it's a custom-made dress. If a woman was very wealthy, she might even order a dress from England. When a woman came in looking for a new dress, the dressmaker might show her some patterns designed according to the latest fashions. The woman could choose the pattern and fabric she liked best. Fabric is cloth that comes in a variety of colors and materials. The dressmaker would then use a measuring tape to measure the woman's arms and legs, as well as her chest, neck, and waist. The measuring tape would help the dressmaker figure out a woman's size. The measurements told the dressmaker how much cloth would be needed for the dress. The dressmaker would then cut the cloth into pieces according to the shape of the patterns. After all the pieces were cut, the dressmaker would hand stitch or sew the pieces together using a fine needle and thread. Remember, back then there was no electric sewing machines like we have today, so this was slow, careful work. Finally, the dressmaker might add fancy finishing touches like hand-knitted lace or embroidery around the collar or hem of the dress. It would sometimes take several weeks to make a new dress. Tailors did the same kind of work as dressmakers, but they made clothing for both men and women. People who wanted new clothes could visit a tailor and have their measurements taken. The tailor would then make a shirt or a pair of breeches to order. Breeches were the knee-length pants that men wore in colonial times, along with long woolen stockings. Almost everyone in early America wore a hat. In fact, it was considered strange or rude to walk around bareheaded. Men wore hats with brims, and women wore soft bonnets. People wore hats to keep their heads warm and dry, to keep the sun out of their eyes and protect the expensive wigs they frequently wore. People who made men's hats were called hat makers or hatters. Men's hats were made out of beaver skin, wool, or camel fur and were fastened together with glue that the hatter mixed himself. As with clothing, people could not simply walk into a hat shop and walk out with a hat on the same day. Instead, a customer chose the particular style of hat, had his head or her head measured by the hatter, and came back days or weeks later when the hat was done. Of all their clothing, shoes were the hardest for farmers to make themselves. So when a farmer needed a new pair of shoes, he would visit the cobbler or shoemaker. The cobbler would make shoes to order, just as was done with the dressmaker, tailor, or hatter. Most people had only 1 or 2 pairs of shoes. Plenty of people had no shoes at all. Poor farmers and their families didn't wear shoes most of the year. If a farmer did have shoes, he might wear the same pair of shoes every day for months. As a result, shoes wore out quickly. Most farmers cannot afford to buy a new pair of shoes very often. So instead of buying new shoes, they would take their old shoes to the cobbler to have them patched or repaired. Cobblers spent much as time fixing old shoes as they did making new ones. The shoemaker used many specialized tools for his trade. In early America, most shoes were made out of leather, which comes from the dried hide or skin of a cow. There were 2 parts to the shoe, the sole and the upper, made both from leather. The sole was the bottom of the shoe, and the upper was the top part of the shoe. Just like a dressmaker or tailor, the shoemaker would take measurements, cut the leather, and then use a needle and thread to sew the pieces together. Making hats, clothes, and shoes was hard work. Farmers who could afford it were very happy to pay others, dressmakers, tailors, hats, and cobblers, to do that work for them. Today, it's much easier to purchase clothes. We can choose from a variety of styles that are already sewn, rather than getting measured and waiting for weeks to get our new clothes. And we don't even have to go to 4 different tradespeople to get the clothes, hats, and shoes we wear. We can just go to 1 department store. The end. Now let's have a discussion. Which tradespeople made clothes for women and for men? Which tradespeople made hats? Which tradespeople made or fixed shoes? What materials did a hatter use to make hats? In your journal, write and draw which tradesperson you would want to be and why. The dressmaker, the tailor, the hatter, or the cobbler. Have these discussions with your families.